Hi, everyone. Megan here from the Wellness Center. The 2026 Dietary Guidelines for Americans just came out last week, and there is a lot of noise and a lot of chatter online about them and criticisms and applauses. So what I thought I would do is just do a recording of a professional registered dietitian going over the facts of the document of the DGA. So that's how I'll talk about them today for shortness. DGA's Dietary Guidelines for Americans. So we're going to go through them. We'll kind of go bullet by bullet of what are the facts of the actual document. I will give you some of my own thoughts and insights about them, especially these versus the last ones that came out. They come out every 5 years. So you can make your own opinion so that you can look at them logically and not listen to all the noise that's going on social media. So let me share. I'm going to just share the actual document itself. So this is downloaded from dietaryguidelines.gov. You can download the document itself, or you can click the other link on the website that will their jazzed up government website of all the stats and the why and what it's highlighting. But I just wanted to go to the actual document. Let's look at the guidelines themselves. So first, we'll see on the front that the image has changed. So we went from, what was it, gosh, like 20 years ago, a food pyramid to a plate. We've been the My Plate for the past two iterations of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And now we're back to a pyramid style, but it's an upside down pyramid. I will save all of my thoughts on this until the end. I will say just up front that the way that it appears with imagery is different than the actual text of the document. So I really, really want you to stick with me here and go through the document itself, because I think first glance, when you look at the imagery, it looks like it's saying eat a ton of meat with a ton of vegetables and eat very, very little, if any, grains. That's kind of what the imagery says to me. And there's a big old stick of butter in the middle of it. And I think the imagery is a little bit confusing. I do, especially when you look at the verbiage and what the actual guidelines are saying. I don't know that it fully matches with the imagery itself. So take that for what it's worth. It doesn't mean I'm disagreeing with the guidelines. It just means I kind of question why we went back to a pyramid style when it's not how we eat. We eat on plates. That's my own belief. All right, page 2 is just the why around it, why they came up with them the way they do. Again, these are for the next 5 years. There will be a new iteration in 5 years, talking a lot about the stats, about the status of the United States. We know that there is a health crisis. We know that 70% or more of Americans have overweight or obesity, that so many people have prediabetes and diabetes and heart disease. So they're giving the background here. This is the why. And they're basically saying that we want to focus very significantly on real food and not ultra processed food. And that's also nothing new. You've heard me shout that from the rooftops if you ever jump in on my webinars. All right, so let's go. Here are the recommendations. First step is talking about portion sizing, eating the right amount for you. The calories that you need depend on your own age, sex, height, weight, and level of physical activity. That sounds right. They're not telling everyone to eat a half a cup of rice. They're telling you to base your portions based on what you need. Pay attention to portion size, particularly those for foods and beverages much higher in calories. That's no change at all from any other past iteration of the guidelines. And hydration is a key factor in overall health. Choose water, still or sparkling, and unsweetened beverages. So they're saying don't drink sweetened beverages as part of a healthful eating plan. So remember, as we're going through this, that the goal of the DGA is to tell us how we should be eating for appropriate optimal health. They are not saying that if you happen to drink a Coke, you will therefore be unhealthy. What these guidelines are saying are, this is the way you should be eating for health. We all know that Coke is not a healthy food, right? So just because it leaves things out doesn't mean like you absolutely cannot eat it. But the guidelines, the reason for these is to tell us what a healthful style of eating would look like. And that means unsweetened drinks and water. Again, this is no change from past iterations of the DGA. The next section, prioritize protein at every meal. So this is a slight change in just the order of operations. Protein is the first thing really listed as the section to look at. Um, it does not necessarily mean that it has to be the first thing on your mind, but they are listing it as something to prioritize. So let's go through what they're talking about with protein at every meal. So this is something I also say whenever I'm talking to you on classes and as clients, that when we're looking at our plate, there should be a source of protein. So that tagline is appropriate. Prioritize high quality, nutrient dense protein foods as part of a healthy dietary pattern. Okay, so we want proteins that have lots of nutrients and are high quality. This is me thinking they're probably intending grass-fed, pasture-raised, well-sourced proteins. But they also say in the next bullet, consume a variety of protein foods from both animal sources and eggs, poultry, seafood, red meat, and plant-based sources of protein, beans, peas, lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, and soy. So, contra to what I'm hearing in the media and a lot of the noise right now is that they're saying only eat meat. They're not. They're saying eat a variety of protein. Swap deep fried cooking methods with baked, broiled, roasted, stir fried, or grilled. And this is no change from past DGA. Consume meat with no or limited added sugars, refined carbohydrates, starches, or chemical additives. So they're talking again here about the quality of the meat source if you are choosing meat as your protein at this meal, so that it's just the meat and not a lot of other stuff added to, let's say seasonings and marinades. If preferred, flavor with salt, spices, and herbs. No different from past DGA. Here is a key difference from past GGAs is protein serving goals is now 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. And then based on your own individual needs. So it used to be zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram. So this has gone up quite a bit, and most people in the nutrition world and the fitness world and the wellness world agree with this. Many of us have been saying for a very long time that protein needs are higher than what they had been listed. The zero point 0.8 that it used to be is a bare minimum to avoid deficiency of protein, whereas 1.2 to 1.6 really is an optimal range for healthiness. So this is something, again, that's been researched pretty in depth. And if you go back to any of my webinars, you'll see the same range for the past couple of years I've been saying, and most nutrition experts will agree with this. So 0.8 is that minimum to not be deficient. And there may be times in life where you eat a little bit less than this range. Let's say when you're really sick and you're recovering, your appetite is really low, you get the flu, you're probably not going to be needing as much protein right off the bat. But then as you start recovering, you want to get back to this range. So this is an appropriate change. Consume dairy is the next section. So again, these sections are not really any different than past iterations. They're just kind of put in different orders. When consuming dairy, include full-fat dairy with no added sugars. There is another key change from past DGAs in that they're specifically spelling out full-fat dairy. The no added sugars part has been there for a long time, so it's been a recommendation to have unsweetened yogurt, for instance, unsweetened milk, because dairy is an excellent source of protein, fat, vitamins, and minerals, but can be a source of sugar if we're eating flavored. The full fat part is interesting because they're spelling that out because there's been such an anti-fat fad for so many years, for decades, and full fat dairy really does bring with it all of the nutrients combined synergistically to where you absorb the right nutrients. The fat helps us absorb the vitamin D, for instance, that's in the dairy. Does everyone need to eat only full fat is where I have a question mark. And I think a lot of nutrition experts out there are having this same question mark of, let's say we're having non-fat dairy, a parfait with non-fat yogurt, and we put nuts and seeds on top or stir in some peanut butter. We're adding fat in a different way that will help us to absorb the nutrients from the yogurt and still keeping our calories low. Whereas let's say I have a major weight loss goal or I have really high cholesterol, so I need to keep my fat limited. If I eat full fat dairy and then I put nuts and seeds and peanut butter in it, I might be really adding up that caloric load too high. So I, along with other experts, really believe there's a space for either non-fat or low-fat dairy if eaten appropriately alongside some other sources of fat. Um, so it's not that full-fat dairy has to be part of your life, but this is what the recommendations are saying, and it's because of the nutrient density of full fat dairy. But again, I don't know how realistic that is with how we typically eat other dairy products. If all you're drinking is milk, maybe that's a different story, especially for kids. Full fat is a different story. So that is a change that I touch and go agree with. Dairy serving goals. This has not changed. 3 servings per day as part of a 2,000 calorie pattern. This is another thing that I've kind of constantly had a touch and go relationship with on all iterations of the DGA. There are lots of people with dairy allergies, dairy restrictions that do just fine with their calcium and their protein intake and their vitamin and mineral intake. So do we have to have 3 servings a day? Not necessarily, as long as you're careful with getting the nutrient sources elsewhere, working with a dietitian. But it would certainly help you meet your protein and calcium goals if you were having that much dairy. But is it absolutely necessary for every person to be healthful? That's where I have another question mark. They talk about gut health here as a little blurb saying how important gut health is and that your gut can become really healthy if you're eating lots of high fiber and fermented foods. Dairy can be one of those things. That's why they put that blurb there. The next section is eating fruits and vegetables throughout the day. Again, no change from past DGAs. This is a high focus. Eat a variety of colorful, nutrient-dense fruits and vegetables every day. Eat whole vegetables and fruits in their original form and wash thoroughly prior to eating raw or cooking. So this is also nothing different. Frozen, dried, or canned vegetables or fruits with no or very limited added sugars can also be good options. No change here. If we're having a processed fruit or vegetable, we want to look at the ingredients and make sure they're not really high in sugars or salts. If preferred, flavor these with salt, spices, and herbs. 100% fruit or vegetable juice should be consumed in limited portions or diluted with water. This is something I'm also kind of seeing in the media of people saying like, oh, how dare you say we can't have fruits or vegetables? They're not saying or juices. They're not saying you can't. They're saying keep it limited or diluted with it, which is also no change from past DGA. They're saying this because it is not in its whole food form. We're not getting the fiber with it, so it really kind of turns into sugar water. We do want to keep juices limited. I know they taste good. I know kids love them. It doesn't mean that we need them for health. So remember the goal of the DGA is what do we need for health? Vegetables and fruit serving goals for a 2,000 calorie diet are as follows: 3 servings per day for vegetables, 2 servings per day for fruit. This is also no change. The recommendation is 5 servings per day of fruits and vegetables. It was, and now they're putting it into 3 of vegetables, 2 of fruits. That should be your minimum, in my opinion, and maybe that should have been focused on a little bit more. That those are a minimum. You can always get more than that for the fiber purpose. And incorporate healthy fats is the next section. Healthy fats are plentiful in many whole foods, such as meats, poultry, eggs, omega-3 seafood, nuts, seeds, full-fat dairy, olives, and avocados. No change here from past EGAs. We do need fat. We do need them from a variety of sources, ideally whole foods and not a whole lot of added oils. When cooking with or adding fats to meals, prioritize oils with essential fatty acids such as olive oil. Other options can include butter or beef tallow. This is yet another change that people are very kind of upset about. Butter and beef tallow are indeed good sources of essential fatty acids, aka omega-3s and some omega-6s. Just because they're good sources doesn't mean those should be our #1 source of fat. However, because while they're good sources of essential fatty acids, they're also high sources of saturated fat, which if we have a lot of overweight or obesity going on, if we have heart disease or high cholesterol or hypertension, we may want to keep saturated fat to a minimum. And indeed, on the next bullet, We say, in general, saturated fat consumption should not exceed 10% of daily calories. Significantly limiting highly processed food will help meet this goal. So it feels a little tricky to say keep saturated fat to a minimum less than 10% of daily calories, but beef tallow and butter can be part of the healthful fat intake. I do actually agree with both statements. I do agree that you can bring beef tallow and butter into your diet in a healthful way and still keep your saturated fat minimized. But I think in our general population, if you're not really educated on food and portion size and really confident and comfortable with cooking, you may not know how to do both. You may not know how to bring butter in a very minimal way and keep saturated fat low. So I do think this is a little bit confusing for the general population. I don't think it's wrong, but I think it's a little confusing for the general population here. So I still recommend personally olive oil and avocado oil as unsaturated oils to cook with, leaning on a lot of our food sources of omega-3s, such as fish and nuts and seeds and avocados, and minimizing butter when using it. Use it kind of minimally for when things really have to taste like butter or when you're baking. And then finally, we have a focus on whole grains, which in past iterations has been a little bit higher up in the conversation. So this is kind of the last thing they talk about, and it's the bottom of the pyramid. And they say prioritize fiber-rich whole grains. So when eating whole grains, prioritize those that have a lot of fiber. This is no change from past iterations. Significantly reduce the consumption of highly processed refined carbohydrates such as white bread, ready-to-eat breakfast cereals, flour tortillas, and crackers. And whole grain serving goals is 2 to 4 servings per day. So these are kind of changed. It used to just say like eat high fiber whole grains and eat a lot of them. In fact, past iterations went up to 11 servings per day, which is a lot of servings of whole grain. Here is where I agree. Whole grains can be part of a healthful diet, and when we eat them, we should be eating those with lots of fiber because fiber should be the emphasis. I also agree that the recommendations before were far too much. You can meet your fiber needs without any grains at all if you're eating a lot of vegetables and beans and lentils and just plant foods. You actually don't need whole grains to be healthy. So that's where I agree with this at like the bottom of the food pyramid, and we don't really need any. But you can, and they can be very healthful, but you certainly don't need 11 servings per day. 2 to 4 is plenty, really focusing on those fiber-rich ones. And the reason for this is so much of our processed foods in our diet are whole grain foods, crackers and breads and cereals, and they taste good, and they can say on the front of the package that they have high fiber. That doesn't necessarily mean they are made from a whole grain and don't have a lot of added things in there. So just we've kind of gone through the pyramid now, is other things. Limit highly processed foods, added sugars, and refined carbohydrates. This was mentioned in other DGAs in the past, but it's really kind of focused on a lot more here and in more detail. So avoid highly processed, packaged, prepared, ready to eat, or other foods that are salty or sweet, such as chips, cookies, candy, those with limited sugar and salt. Prioritize nutrient-dense foods and home-prepared meals. When dining out, choose nutrient-dense options. This is pretty self-explanatory. This is exactly what I say at every single session you hear me teach at, or at every conversation we have, is ultra processed foods are a problem and we eat too much of them. And for a healthful diet, which is what this whole document is about, we should be minimizing those things and eating real food. We should be limiting foods and beverages that include artificial flavors, dyes, artificial preservatives, low-calorie, non-nutritive sweeteners, aka artificial sweeteners. Again, this is stuff that I preach and that all nutrition experts preach, is that things that are synthetic, our body doesn't have the process to break them down. So they're not good for us. It doesn't mean that you can never have something with an artificial flavor or that is the number one thing you should focus on. In fact, this is not, what page are we even on right now? Page 4. It's not even listed until page 4. We should be focusing on the healthful foods first before we worry about this. But to be healthful, we do not need things that are artificial and synthetic, including artificial sweeteners. Avoid sugar sweetened beverages such as soda, fruit, and energy drinks. While no amount of added sugars or artificial sweeteners is recommended, one meal should contain no more than 10 grams of added sugar. So that's about the same recommendation that there used to be. So what they're saying is maximum of 10 gram of added sugar per meal, but you definitely don't need to reach that. When selecting snack foods, added sugar limits should follow FDA healthy claim limits. For example, grain snacks should not exceed 5 grams of added sugar per serving. Dairy snacks should not exceed 2.5 grams of added sugar. So, this is more for labeling guidelines so that you can know if it says healthy, it should be less than those amounts of added sugar. A little bit more on added sugar is if you want to identify them in a label, you should look for words like sugar syrup or those words ending in ose, like sucralose, fructose, maltose. And here's a list of other names to look for. And food and drinks such as fruits and plain milk have natural sugars, but they are not considered added. So this is just a blurb to help you with label reading. Alcohol. Consume less alcohol for better overall health. I think this is self-explanatory. This is nothing new. Alcohol is not healthy. Again, doesn't mean you absolutely cannot ever drink alcohol, but the point of this document is to tell us what equals most healthful eating and drinking, and that does not include alcohol. Okay. Sodium and electrolytes are essential for hydration. The general population should have less than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day, and it gives some guidelines, and these aren't really any different. Highly processed foods should be avoided because those are very high in added sodium. So we worry less about salt at the table, more about salt in added foods. And then the whole rest of the document just talks about special populations. So in this section, we're looking at infants and early childhood, which goes up to 4 years old. How ideally we are breastfeeding only if able, because that really is the most nutrient dense up to 2 years old. If that is not available in iron fortified formula. Nothing new here. Supplements of vitamin D for babies, possibly iron, depending on what's going on with the baby. At age 6, we introduce solid foods, or 6 months, we introduce solid foods. They did add here, which is interesting. They've actually put it into the DGA to introduce allergenic foods to babies around 6 months and work with a dietitian or a provider on that. That's been shown in research to be beneficial for preventing allergies. Infants should receive a diverse range of nutrient-dense foods and textures, and avoid highly processed foods. So I'm glad this is specifically stated here. We need to move toward more healthful eating for babies. Examples of nutrient-dense foods includes everything we just talked about. Meat, poultry, seafood, fruits and vegetables, yogurt, cheese, whole grains, legumes, seeds, nuts as appropriate. And no added sugars in early childhood. So this is a slight change too. It used to be 0 for infants and up to 3 or 4 for kids. Now I can't remember grams for child per day for children, and now it's 0. So once again, I will repeat myself once again, that this doesn't mean your child can never eat sugar or that they are suddenly unhealthy for having something with sugar. But this document, these guidelines are supposed to say what is needed for health. And kids up to 4 need 0 added sugars. In fact, none of us really need added sugars, but that's really best for them if they have 0. And if they have a little bit, you're going to be okay. They're going to be okay. But same thing with all their other guidelines here. They talk about how to introduce food at 6 months. So that's going to be obviously important to young moms and dads, maybe even grandparents who are babysitting. For middle childhood from 5 to 10, the only big change here was again that no amount of added sugars is recommended. They say that again, which is good. That these documents provide the basis for then how nutrition initiatives are created, how school lunches are created. If 0 is recommended for this age group, you're going to see less in school lunches. Okay, it doesn't mean you cannot feed them added sugar, but it's just something to be aware of what the guidelines really are. Adolescence is 11 to 18. Nothing really changed here other than, eating nutrient dense foods for them. Same thing for young adulthood. No changes that I saw for pregnant women recommendations, or for lactating. And older adults, I didn't see anything new either. Vegetarians and vegans, there's a section here to consume a variety of whole foods and focus on protein, such as dairy, eggs, beans, peas, lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, tofu, or tempeh. So, for some of the criticisms about these guidelines saying you have to eat meat, they don't. They're just saying how that you should include a variety of proteins that are not meat if you are vegetarian or vegan. And again, limit highly processed foods, especially those that are a vegan or vegetarian meat alternative, watching the fats, sugars, and salts there, paying careful attention to potential nutrient gaps because sometimes these diets fall short in vitamin D, E, choline, and iron, and some of the B vitamins, and you may want to supplement in this case. That's it. Those are the guidelines. So I want to go back up now that we've read through them and have you relook at this picture and just kind of think like, does this picture really symbolize what we just read? And again, this is the one part of the DGA that I don't love as much. I do like the picture of the plate. I think it helps us to visualize our meals a bit better than this sort of just pyramid structure. But I also don't think that these pictures really demonstrate exactly what was said. The DGA didn't really change that much. It's really saying whole foods, real foods, less ultra processed foods, and that's just focused and emphasized more in this, but it's the past ones have said the same thing. It does say eat more protein, but it says that protein can come from a variety of protein sources, including plant proteins, and that if eating whole grains, you don't need nearly as much as we used to think, and when you are eating them, eat those that are really high sources of fiber. Other than that, there's not a whole ton of change. Something else I'm hearing in the media is about accessibility and how if we're going to say the world needs, or our country, this is just the United States, that our country needs to eat more real foods, more fruits and vegetables, more good quality protein, and less ultra processed foods, we need to make them accessible. And while I 1,000% agree with that, the accessibility is not the job of the DGA. It's not the job of this document to provide accessibility. This document, these guidelines for every 5 years, their job is to say, what does healthy eating look like for the human body in our country? And then, ideally, based on these guidelines, we make new initiatives. We change school lunches. We look at what areas are not able to eat the way that we just said is healthy, and how can we make that happen for them. These are what create the basis for programs like SNAP and what you're able to use your SNAP dollars on and what you can't. So we start here. This is the baseline, is what is healthy eating, and then we create initiatives moving forward. So I sure hope to see initiatives of accessibility as we move forward in these next 5 years. But the job of this document is to create that baseline first. If I were to say I had one criticism, I would say they didn't focus enough on fiber. They focused a lot on that increased need for protein, but there wasn't a showing of a better increased need for fiber. In fact, they didn't even list the minimum of 25 grams. So that would be my biggest criticism. There's always something that could be better on any document, but in general, I do think the focus on unprocessed, good, healthy, real food is a good step in the right direction. So hopefully this helped to actually look at the document and turn off external noise and just sort of read for yourself. If you are really interested in this and you want to chat more, if you have questions, feel free to email me, come by my office if you're at the Wellness Center. Would love to just hear your ideas and your thoughts and what's going through your head and how we can maybe put this into a plate form so we can actually see meals that look like this. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your week. Bye.